Part 1, Chapter 3. It didn't take long for Elita and us to become bitter enemies. She was a favored grandchild, and she had always made sure we didn't forget it. When she had arrived at Abuela Avila's house 6 years before, when she was 7, my grandmother had kicked my grandfather out of her bed to make space for Elita in her bedroom. Anything Elita wanted, she would get: a new dress, a new pair of shoes, treats, and unlimited time watching television. At my grandmother's insistence, Elita's mother would send her presents too. Once she got a Walkman from El Otro Lado, and she was the envy of the whole neighborhood. At home, she would spend hours lying on the hammock listening to Michael Jackson songs on her Walkman, while we three cleaned the house from top to bottom. Another time, my grandmother thought Elita should learn how to type so she could be the best secretary Iguala had ever had. And soon after, a typewriter arrived from El Otro Lado. Elita would spend hours tapping away, while we three did nothing but chores and longed for our own presents from El Otro Lado. She hardly ever shared her stuff with us, and whenever she allowed us to play with her dolls, we had to play the role of the maids, and she was always the rich woman. She was even bossier than my grandmother. Then we didn't want to play anymore because it was bad enough being bossed around in real life, let alone when we were supposed to be playing. But the worst thing about Alida was the nicknames she had given us. She called me Chueca, crooked, because I am left-handed, so she said I was deformed. Carlos she called Calaca, skeleton, because he was extremely skinny, except for his big belly full of tapeworm. And Mago's nickname was Piojosa because of all the lice she had on her head. Carlos and I tolerated the nicknames as much as we could, but not Mago. She and Elita were constantly fighting like old ladies, and things went from bad to worse the day Mago threatened to infest Elita's hair with lice. Elita's hair was her most prized possession. It was so long that it tumbled down her back like a sparkling black waterfall. Every few days, Abuela Avila washed Elita's hair with lemon water to keep it shiny and healthy. In the afternoons, Abuela Avila would fill up a bucket from the water tank, cut off lemons from the tree, and squeeze the juice into the water. Mago, Carlos, and I would hide behind a bush and watch through the leaves. Abuela Avila washed Elita's hair as if it were an expensive and delicate silk shawl. Afterward, Elita would sit under the sun to dry her hair. My grandmother then brushed it in small strokes, beginning with the tips and working her way up. She spent half an hour running the comb through Elita's long hair while we watched. Our hair was full of lice, our bellies swollen with tapeworm, but my grandmother didn't care. She said, "Maybe you aren't even my grandchildren." Sometimes I wished she was right. I didn't want her to be my grandmother either. "Your mother is not coming back for you," Elita said to us one afternoon while lying in the sun to let her hair dry. "Now that she's got a job and is making dollars, she won't want to come back, believe me." 3 weeks before, Mommy had called us on the phone and told us she'd gotten a job at a garment factory. She'd said she was finally helping Papi save money for the house and had promised to send us money for shoes and clothes. We couldn't tell Mommy not to bother, that the money they spent disappeared by the time my grandmother made it home from the bank. My grandmother would stand next to us while we talked on the phone, and if we said anything bad about her, she would spank us. "She'll be back. I know she will," Mago told Alita. In the 2.5 months we'd been there, my parents had called us every other weekend. Mago would remind Mommy of her promise, that she would return in a year. "Don't lie to yourself," Alita said. "They're going to forget all about you. You'll see. You're always going to be the little orphans." "Speak for yourself. It's your mother who's not coming back," Mago said. "Doesn't she have another child over there in El Otro Lado?" At being reminded of her American brother, Alita looked away. Abuela Avila came out of the house carrying a large plastic comb. She sat behind Elita and combed her long hair that smelled of lemonade. Elita was quiet, and she didn't answer Abuela Avila when she asked her what was wrong. An hour later, Elita was back on the patio. She lay down on the hammock and watched us do our chores. Mago swept while I watered Abuela Avila's pots of vinca and geraniums. Carlos was in the backyard helping my grandfather clear the brush. Elita rocked herself in the hammock, eating a mango on a stick that she'd bought at Don Bartolo's store. It was a beautiful mango, cut to look like a rose, its yellow flesh sprinkled with red chili powder. My mouth watered at seeing her take a bite. "My mother loves me," she said. "Oh, shut up already," Mago said. She turned the broom to face Alita and swept towards her. "Stupid orphan," Alita yelled, scrambling to get away from the cloud of dust Mago had sent her way. "Piojosa!" "So what if I have lice?" Mago said. "And if you aren't careful, I'll give them to you. and we'll see what happens to all that pretty hair of yours. Mago pulled me to her and started parting my hair. Look, look, a louse, she said, holding it out to Elita. Abuelita! Abuelita! Elita yelled, her eyes opened wide with fear. She ran into the house, holding on to her thick, long braid. Mago and I looked at each other. Look what you've done. We're really going to get it now, I said to Mago. I thought we were going to get a beating with my grandmother's wooden spoon, or a branch, or a sandal, the usual choices. I would have preferred a beating to what we got. In the evening, when my aunt came home from work, Abuela Avila told her to take care of our lice problem. My aunt gave Mago money and sent her to buy kerosene, a really smelly oil used to light lamps and kill lice. The last rays of the sun were gone, and darkness fell around us. My grandmother turned on the light on the patio, but it didn't work. There was no power that night. She brought out her candles and set them on the water tank. When Mago returned with the kerosene, my aunt sat us down one by one. What if that doesn't work? Elita asked. If the kerosene doesn't work, I'm shaving off their hair, Abuela Avila said. At hearing my grandmother's words, I stopped squirming. Tia Emperatriz ran through my hair with a lice comb. She made me tilt my head all the way back and poured kerosene onto my hair. The smell made my head spin. She made sure every strand of hair was covered before wrapping my head with a towel and tying a plastic bag over it to keep it in place. I sat so still I could hear the mosquitoes buzzing around. They bit my legs and arms, but the thought of getting my head shaved kept me from moving. Now off to bed, my aunt said when she was done, but stay away from the lit candles. My grandmother had given us a twin-sized bed for the three of us to share. It was tucked into a corner of my grandfather's room. I slept in the middle between Mago and Carlos so that I wouldn't fall off. We would huddle together at night, clinging to each other, even though Carlos had started wetting the bed soon after Mommy had left. But that night I wasn't worried about being peed on. It was a long, restless night, and we couldn't sleep. I wanted to scratch, 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 but I couldn't. The overwhelming smell of the kerosene made me dizzy. I tried to hold my breath for as long as I could, and when my lungs were bursting, I would take in a big gulp of air and feel my head spinning like a top. I reached for my towel and pulled on it, not being able to bear the pain any longer. Leave it alone, Mago said. It hurts so much, I said. I need to scratch. I really need to. My scalp feels like it's on fire, Carlos said. I can't take it anymore. Don't do it, Mago said. We'll get our hair chopped off if you ruin it now. I don't care. With one swoop of his hand, Carlos pulled off the towel. A half hour later, I did the same. Abuela Avila was true to her word. The next afternoon, when my grandfather came home from work, she had him take out his razor blade and scissors. Carlos's hair was completely shaved off. We ran our hands over his bald head, feeling the stubble tickle our palms. When she saw him, Elita burst out laughing. Now you really do look like a skeleton. She started to sing a song. Laca, laca, tilica, y flaca. Laca, laca, tilica, y flaca. I laughed because it was a funny song, and I could picture the lank and skinny skeleton dancing along to it. Regina, it's your turn, Abuela Avila said. Please, Abuelita, no. I yelled as my grandmother dragged me to the chair. My grandfather hit me on the head with his hand and ordered me to sit still. It's up to you if you want to move, he said when I wouldn't stop. Just don't blame me for how the haircut turns out. I jerked around, crying and yelling for Mommy to come. I hated myself for being so weak the night before when I'd torn the towel off. Tears rolled down my face, and I cried for my hair because I loved my hair. It was the only beautiful thing I had, curls so thick that women in the street would stop and touch them and tell Mommy, "What lovely hair your daughter has. She looks like a doll." And Mommy would smile with pride. Don't move, Nena. He's doing a really bad job, Mago said, but I didn't listen, and the scissors hissed near my ear. I squirmed even more at watching my curls spill onto the ground and onto my lap, falling one by one like flower petals. Then my grandmother's chickens came, clucking, to see what was happening. They picked up my curls and shook them around. They stepped all over them and dragged them with their feet across the dirt. In the end, when Abuelo Augurio was done, I ran to the mirror. My hair was as short as a boy's, and it was so uneven it looked as if a cow had nibbled on it. I hid under my covers and didn't come out. I looked at Papi's photo hanging on the wall. I'd looked at myself in the mirror enough times to know that his slanted eyes were just like mine. We both had small foreheads, wide cheeks, and a wide nose. And now we both had short black hair. When are you coming back? I asked the man behind the glass. Do you love me? I wished I had a picture of Mommy. I wanted to tell her I missed being with her. I missed going to the canal and sitting on the washing stone while she scrubbed our clothes and told me stories. If the water was low, she would let me get in and chase after the soap bubbles as she dunked the clothes into the water to rinse. I missed going with her to visit Abuelita Chinta and taking a nap on my grandmother's bed while they talked. I would fall asleep listening to Mommy's voice and the cooing of my grandmother's doves. And at night I missed snuggling with her on the bed she'd shared with Papi. Mago and I would try to keep Mommy warm so she wouldn't miss me so much. So she wouldn't miss him so much. Mago came in to tell me it was dinner time. I looked at her and hated her because she hadn't gotten her hair chopped off. She'd dealt with the stupid scratching all night long, and in the morning she'd woken up and all the lice had been dead. Even though she'd washed her hair 20 times with Tia Emperatrice's shampoo and smelled of roses, it still reeked of kerosene. But at least she didn't look like a boy. Leave me alone, I said. Come on, Nena, come and eat. My stomach didn't care that my hair had been butchered. It groaned with hunger. But I had no choice but to go out into the kitchen where everyone could see me. Tia Emperatriz, who had been at work when the hair cutting had taken place, gasped at seeing me and said, Ay, Ama, what did you do to this poor girl? Elita said, What girl? Isn't that Carlos? When I glared at her, she laughed and said, Oops, I thought you were your brother. That night, I had a dream about Mommy. In my dream, she was washing my still long black hair with lemon water and scrubbing it so gently that I sighed with pleasure. I woke up with a pain in my heart, and I felt like crying. Then I realized that Carlos had wet our bed, and I was soaked.